Okay, so today I want to talk about like as you're kind of working out, every Kaizen meeting has a different theme, and the principle of the Kaizen meeting is really this whole concept of once a month we want to be thinking about another element of the business and just working together as a team and thinking, how do we improve that area of the business and what is it that we need to do? The idea of these is that we're picking that we're working in a sequence. Now, of course, you might say, well, actually, I really need to, we've got a problem with like our backstage process, or we've got a problem that we haven't reviewed our costs. So you can, of course, come back to these Kaizen meetings at any time and do them at a time that's particularly pertinent to your business. But we're just kind of working through them one stage at a time, which means that, it may or may not be the most pressing topic at the moment. But ultimately, what we're doing by this is working on each of these elements at least once over the course of the year, which is really important. And one of the Kaizen meetings that we did, and I've done for years as a business, is thinking about what's the future team look like. Yes, I know where we're at the moment, and it's kind of an opportunity to think, well, how are we working well together and what's not working well together. What could we do better today with the team that we've got? But when you've got a clear understanding of where you're going and where the team needs to be, that helps drive your decisions and your thinking. And I want to kick off by sharing a few examples of brilliant teams and how they've worked together. And the first one is, have any of you seen The Last Dance? So The Last Dance is a fantastic documentary about the Chicago Bulls and about Phil Jackson and how he led them to becoming the best, particularly given the resources, the best basketball team of all time. And he was legendary in his ability to leverage the strengths of the individual team players. And that's what delivered this kind of domination of the 1990s. Chicago Bulls nowadays are actually not a particularly well-respected team, and they're not having a particularly good run. But in the 90s, they were the team to beat. And Jackson became famous for his use of the triangle offense, which is a system that emphasized sort of spacing, movement, and teamwork. And this was pivotal in maximizing the talents of the key players. And it was really about putting those key players into the best position possible, the likes of Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. And so he did this great job of putting them in the best roles possible and giving them the best chance to succeed. Um, so that's what we want to be doing with our team. We want to be making sure that we're in the right place to excel and putting all of the right people in the right seats. And this was really apparent on the Business of Endurance podcast when we interviewed Krista Cullen. So Krista Cullen, actually old Okamian, so Krista, for those of you that don't remember, she was the lady that essentially she was on the winning team, gold medal winning team in Rio for GB hockey, but she was actually the one that kind of scored the goal that got them into the shootout which won them the gold medal. And she'd actually retired. She'd been retired from hockey for 3 years and was out living in Kenya. And she got a call from the GB coach going, "We need somebody that can perform this specific role." She was known for being a tall lady, but with long levers. And so she could really sort of hike the ball the length of the field incredibly well. And as a result, she was pulled back out of retirement, dropped into the GB setup for a combination of her experience, but also that specific role that she could perform within the team. And it turned out that goal that she scored that ultimately ended up winning them the gold medal, it was almost the only goal she ever scored for Team GB. But so it was an unbelievably forward-thinking, team-based decision by the coach. And I've used this example before, but the rugby team to me is probably the team that best signifies the way that a business team can work. Because if you think about a rugby team, that you've got the props, which are huge, strong guys, particularly the hooker that you definitely wouldn't want to bump into down a blind dark alley. But you've got like the little scrum half that's all about sort of getting in and diving into the trouble and coming out with the ball. You've got the speed of the wing and the backs. You've got the strength of the centres and the strength and the height of the back row. It's just such a different team with unique strengths, and it really is It's a great analogy for how we need to think about the different people in our business. Now, within those of you that are here, who of you has done your own Kolbe A index? So Claire has, Tina hasn't, Andrew and Karen, have any of you guys done your Kolbe A indexes yet?
No,
And Wayne or
no.
Tina haven't? No. Okay. Um, okay, so project between now uh and the workshop is I'd really like you all to do your Colbier index. It costs I think like $50 or something like that. Uh, do it for you, but I would really encourage you to do it for every member of your team. It is so I've done disk analysis, I've done Myers-Briggs, I've done a few others I'm going to mention later on actually. But the most powerful psychometric tool that I've found for building a team is the Colbier Index. And what it does is it helps you understand yourself better, but it helps you understand your team better, and it also helps you match the right people to the right seats. And so, just to give you sort of four ways of, well, four frameworks within the Colbier Index. So the first is this, what's called the fact find, and the fact find is all about simplifiers versus strategizers. So somebody that has a high fact find is somebody that's very detail orientated. They want to get really kind of very specific, kind of really want to know the details before they're happy to proceed. A simplifier, a low fact find person is somebody that just wants the overview. I just want the high level stuff. And then actually, a great trait. So for each of these four categories, you're going to see there's a high, a low, and a middle ground. And obviously, each of them have their strengths for different types of roles. But somebody with a middle fact finder is very good at taking the complex and explaining it in a way that most people can understand. So, for example, a great financial advisor usually has a middle range fact finder, because somebody that's too high fact finder, yes, they can understand the detail, but then they explain it in too much detail for the client. Whereas a good financial advisor, as an example, is somebody that can take the complicated and explain it in a much easier way. So fact find is the first category. Second is, I think somebody is not muted. If you could just mute yourself, that'd be really brilliant. Thank you. The second is what's called the follow through. And the follow through is could be best summarized by your propensity to finish a process. And so somebody that's got a high follow through is very good at systematizing things. Whereas somebody with a low follow through is much more about adapting and kind of multitasking and all that sort of stuff. I have a very low follow through. You probably won't be surprised to hear. But what that means is I need to build a team around me that have a much better follow through to ensure that the things that I start actually get finished by somebody else. You've then got the quick start, which is about the risk taker within you. And the risk taker is, or quick start is really about a high quick start is somebody that's likely to be much more innovative, experiment, try different things, but also therefore likely to be more entrepreneurial. Whereas somebody with a low quick start is much more about stabilization, about kind of stability, stick with what already works. So is less likely, more likely to be an employee than running their own business. And then finally, you've got the implementer, and the implementer is really about the tangible solutions versus kind of envisioning solutions. So somebody that's got a low implementer is much more likely to be happy working with their head, whereas somebody that's got a high implementer is much more likely to be working with their hands. So a desk job would typically be suited to somebody with a lower implementer. Another way you might use this is if you saw somebody that was keen on working in a desk job, but they had a higher implementer than you might have thought of. It's probably really important that they have a hobby that allows them to use their hands, like art and craft or something like that, because that's going to satisfy their need for that higher implementer to offset the fact that they're not getting that from their role, their business role. So how do we use this? Well, we can use this through an org chart, and I've shared this with you before, and we'll kind of dive into this some more. I can share this. We can share this with you if you haven't got this. But what you can do is you can start to build up the ideal Kolbe profile for each of these different roles. So, for example, we said like here, I'm going to stick with the financial advisor example that I used earlier. So you've got a mid-range fact finder because they're good at explaining things. You want kind of more adaptable, so a relatively low follow through, relatively high quick start. If they ran their own financial planning business, you'd expect that 7 to be higher than that. And then they're typically working with their head, not their hands, so a low implementer. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to start to say, well, okay, if I'm going to interview somebody and I see that they aren't the right Kolbe index for this particular role, it allows you to say, well, look, why would I employ that person in this role? Because they're actually going to be they're going to struggle to implement, to be that person, that role. But the second thing that's going to happen is they're going to really start to they're not going to struggle. They're going to be unhappy doing it long term, and so therefore it's really important that we would always get the interview process down to the last three, Kolbe Index, all three of them, and that would be a significant part of the recruitment process. And so I'll come back to the Kolbe Index in a minute, but it's really a really powerful way of helping you understand whether the right people are doing the right tasks and how you can also how you can bring a new person on. If they've got a high fact find, they're going to need kind of lots of support early on because they're a detailed person and they're going to feel like they're like really overwhelmed to start with. So you're going to have to drip feed somebody with a high fact find much information much slower than somebody that's got a low fact find. One other principle that you can use, which ties in really nicely with the Kolbe index, is what's called the print profile. And this is about kind of what's going on. What you'd say is Kolbe index is how it materializes above the water, so of the iceberg. But print is about your unconscious motivations. They're much deeper. They're much about what's going on below the water. Why are you motivated to have the Kolbe index that you have? And by the way, the Kolbe index very rarely changes. Sometimes people are in a stage of transition and it will pick up that. But generally speaking, once you've got your Kolbe index, it won't change much at all. And that's because it's driven by these unconscious motivators. And if you understand those for you and your team, again, you can work better as a team and you can align yourself with those roles better. And your print profile, you can go off and just again pay for that to all be analyzed with a series. You go through a questionnaire, and it will give you quite a lot of information about which will, when you read it about yourself, you're like, okay, so that to me that made a huge amount of sense. I would say this is less for me. This is less beneficial than the Kolbe index, but it is helpful in understanding why you have the Kolbe index that you have. So what we want to do now is we want to just kind of think a little bit more about where we're trying to get the business to in the future. And you'll remember that I've been through this concept of the business life cycle before, and how it is the processes that get you from this lifestyle business through to what we're trying to get to is this leadership growth company. But really, if we're trying to get here, the whole concept of this leadership growth company is that you've got this solid leadership team in place, that whether the founder is there or not, that leadership team would continue to grow the business, to continue to evolve the business, and continue to kind of drive the business forward. So if that's where we're trying to get to, I shared with you in the last workshop the org chart that comes out of Traction. I didn't spend a lot of time on it. I just want to kind of revisit it a little bit, but explain a couple of key things. So with this org chart, what we've got here is this concept of we have the visionary founder. So what we're saying is there should be a person in the business, and actually I think First Financial are a really good example of this. Yash seems to me to be the visionary that sits at the top of First Financial. Now I might be wrong on that. I don't know. Tina might be shaking her head, going, "No, no, no, that's completely wrong." But that she can't speak, so she can't answer back anyway. Um, but this visionary founder, I think, is really really powerful as a concept, because if somebody's responsibility is just to come up with ideas, actually, and not to implement any of those ideas, it frees up a lot of the business opportunity. And because often the business owner is the biggest bottleneck in the business. So if we have this visionary founder in place, then the next and if we use the trusted team as an example, that would be me. But then we have this integrator. Now the integrator is the person that is responsible for taking those ideas and making them happen. They're also a bit of a filter. So they look at those ideas and go, "Oh, that's a rubbish idea, Charlie. You shouldn't be doing that," or "That's going to be really difficult to implement. Let's kind of park that." And of course, the integrator in the trusted team is Charlotte. So she'll be the person that's sitting there listening to my long list of ideas, going, "No, no, 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 we can't do that now." Or are we focusing on, sorry, Charlotte's smiling at me saying this.
I've muted because I'm chuckling, but yeah.
um, but this integrator is a really powerful role, and then that is then led or sits above what would be described as the five seats of the leadership team. And those five seats would be sales, marketing, ops, finance, and HR. Now, if you read Traction, this is the structure that they feel that can best operate pretty much any company. But of course, you adapt it to how the size of your business. So, for example, if you read the E Myth by Michael Gerber, he would say you design this org chart. Even if you're a one-man business, you still should have the org chart. But unfortunately, your name then sits in every one of those boxes. But the point is that once you then start to go, well, okay, we need now to delegate more of this, or I want my number two person, I'm going to make them the person that does the operations seat, or they're going to be sales and marketing. But it allows you to think in roles, which I think is really powerful. And then, of course, you can adapt it. So that Kolbe org chart that I showed you earlier on actually was essentially the same as this, but albeit going down into deeper levels, and also breaking out operations into several different roles. Because within a finance business, you might have the head of operations that runs the financial advisors, and you might have another person that runs the power planning and the technical or the compliance side. So depending on the size of the business, but ultimately you may well have an ops director that sits above all of those. So again, you can kind of build this out, and you can kind of use this principle and this thinking around, well, what that looks like as the business grows. Now, one thing that wasn't a consideration when Traction was written, and like I said before, I think if you want to think about this org chart structure, Gino Wickman's book is just brilliant on this. But one thing that isn't covered in this, and something that I'm going to come back to in the next workshop, is the concept of the chief AI officer. Because to me now, in theory, that could be, I suppose historically that would have been a chief technology officer or something along those lines. But if we think, how are we going to embrace AI? We need to have somebody that's sat at the table that's responsible for knowing the AI landscape and saying, well, yes, we have the potential to do this, that, and the other with regards to AI. Because I think, yes, we want to be training the whole team around how we can use AI. But I think if there's one person that's sitting at the leadership table that is the real champion, that's going, that you've brought in to research and understand and to implement some of these AI opportunities, then I think that's going to be hugely powerful. So we'll talk a bit more about that at the next workshop. Um, but ultimately, what we're doing is we're kind of coming back to that. I mentioned Krista Cullen right at the start. We're coming back to this concept of saying, well, look, how can we find the right people with the right type of thinking and the right experience? And sometimes, if we think back to what Matthew referred to this concept a few times, um, how the reason that the CIA didn't spot the red flags that would have forewarned them that 9/11 was happening was because they'd recruited similar people from similar backgrounds as opposed to recruiting different people from different backgrounds that would have been able to spot that. So we need to think about, well, okay, how can we, when we're thinking about recruiting, how can we recruit diversity of experience, diversity of background, diversity of gender, so that we can bring much better ideas to our leadership team and come at this thinking from a different angle altogether. Well, and I think the key to this conversation is really just starting to make you think, look, where are we missing something here? What's holding us back, and where should we be going next? Because when you've got a clearer idea of where you should be heading in the future, firstly, when you meet the right person, uh, you will seize them even if it's not the right time. And we've certainly had instances of doing that. And in fact, actually, the example I often use with Kolbe was I was recruiting for a new PA, and we interviewed a lady called Charlie Kinder, and she was absolutely brilliant, really lovely, interviewed brilliantly. She was the first person that got all the thinking fast and slow questions right since we'd started asking them. Um, and if you don't know what that means, I'll explain it another time. But so she was absolutely brilliant, and our Kolbe Index told us she was going to be totally wrong at being a PA. It was just completely wrong. So we recruited a different PA, but we said to her, look, we think you're brilliant. We think you'll make a great power planner. She went, oh God, I don't like the idea of power planning. That sounds really boring. We said, well, okay, we'll come into the business. You can spend 3 months in 4 different areas of the business. And at the end of the year, you decide which one you want to niche down on. And at the end of the year, she decided that power planning was the thing. She was the quickest person to do all her exams. She was the first person or she was one of the first people that Tom recruited from Accelerate once he got up and running, because she was just brilliant. And it was the Kolbe Index that told us that. So I would really, really encourage you to use that as a tool. And get everyone in your team to do that. I wanted to give you a few other bits that can help you on this journey. If you do decide that you need to recruit, we have a tool called the recruitment scorecard that we've shared with you in the past, but I know we've got a couple of new members here. So if you need that, it's a really powerful tool in terms of independently verifying or deciding on the best candidate. It brings in the Kolbe A scores, the questioning, and all that sort of stuff. And there's a piece around the recruitment scorecard that was in one of the previous workshops, and I can't actually remember which one. I think it might have been the expert team. So that's worth using if you are going to start recruiting. There is a whole piece on the Kolbe A index called the Kolbe concept, which explains again in a little bit more detail how you can use the Kolbe A index. But ultimately, what happens is once you've done your Kolbe A index, you get a report that'll explain a lot of what I've just described about you or the person that's done it. What I would also ask is, once you've done your Kolbe A index, send the score through to Amy. Send the 4 numbers through to Amy, because we'll put them on your badge. But also, if you do it for your whole team, start to build out that org chart, and you're very welcome to share that Kolbe A index with, because it might be that we can start to say, well, look, this person's Kolbe A index would be more suited to them shifting sideways or this, or they might be happier doing this. So we can definitely have that sort of conversation to help you. There's another tool called the Strengths Finder, which is a book that was written by Gallup. It's about, I think there's 39 strengths. It's another useful tool. There is a learning lunch that we've done on the Strengths Finder. So I'd start with Kolbe A index, But if you want to take it to another level or just do more for yourself, I'm not sure that you need to get everyone in the team to do this, but it is useful for yourself to understand the Strengths Finder. So you can watch the Learning Lunch on that. And then there's also a piece called the Print Framework, which we also did in a previous workshop, which will be in the portal. Which again, hopefully, Charlotte, can you make a point of sending all of these out as a follow up actually, because it would be useful for people to do. But this is again after Kolbe Index, but would be the next step into that. And then one more piece that we've done in the trusted team historically, which I will circle back to. But if you are building the business and you want to make sure that that culture is not diluted, it's worth going through one of the concepts that we've talked about in the past, which again is in the portal, called the Culture Cultivator. So I would circle back to that. And if you or your team want to kind of learn more on this area, there are a few things that I can direct you to. Obviously, traction we talked about with the org chart, but it's also brilliant for understanding how you get the right people in the right seats. Gina Wickman is also a big fan of the Kolbe Index, so it kind of refers to that. The E-Myth is very good about building an org chart, particularly for smaller businesses. Rebel Ideas for thinking, for diverse thinking. Strength Finders for finding out, again, more about yourself. And then Grit by Angela Duckworth, which I didn't mention, but there's actually there's a great questionnaire. It's not the best business book I've ever read, but one of the best things in there is that the people with grit outperform people with talent. So I think the saying is something along the lines of hard work outperforms talent that doesn't work, something along those lines. And grit is a questionnaire, or has within it a questionnaire that is like, when they looked at it, the people that scored higher on the grit questionnaire way outperformed the people that scored higher on the talent questionnaire. So it's actually a good thing to incorporate into your recruitment process, because people that are willing to work hard will find a way of delivering the results that you're looking for.